and welcome to the next tour with
Ian.
and Andia. Thanks for joining us today. We're super excited. We're here doing episode 16, Transition and the Guard and Reserve with Terri Bailey. So Terri is a military spouse. Her husband has been in the Army National Guard in various states. He's an 05. He's been in for 31 years, and they've been married for 25 years. His potential date of transition is not till 2033, so a little bit of time still left there, just a little bit. But Terri herself is an accredited financial counselor, so part of the great organization that I belong to as well. And she owns her own private practice, a financial counseling practice called Daily Financial Success. So Terri, welcome. We're so super glad to have you here. I think this is an important subject, and we're so glad to have an expert in this to chat with us today. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And you're announcing my company name, and sometimes I feel like I missed the boat there, calling it Daily Financial Success when it could be Bailey Financial Success. But that ship has sailed. But I think about it often, especially when I hear other people say it. But yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, we're so excited to have you on, Terri, and again, to be able to tap into your expertise, specifically your expertise in being able to help to bridge that gap for our audience and listeners on what it means to serve in the Guard or Reserve. You know, as we've talked about, Andy and I, we tend to focus on the active. We tend to focus on, in our previous episodes on hitting retirement and so forth, but that's not always the case. And I think we're going to get into some stats a little bit later on how many folks actually serve in our Guard and Reserve components and how many transition out of active duty into those components. So that leads me to my first question for you. You know, because I came out of active duty, right, and I did not want to continue to serve in uniform, but there are a lot of folks that do. Can you kind of hit on some of those major considerations somebody should look at when they leave the active force and get into or want to get into the Guard or Reserve component and kind of what that looks like?
Yeah, I think your first steps, if you're considering transitioning from any active status to Guard or Reserve status, is just to make sure you initially meet that basic criteria. So, are you in good standing with the military? Do you eat? Do you meet the age and physical requirements? Typically, that's like age 17 to 42. Obviously, not 17 if you're getting out of active service, but those are the general age ranges. Um, and then I think your first step would be to, get with some recruiting and retention, get with your TAP advisor. Military One Source is a super great resource for all things military and actually walks you through step by step things that you would need to do this, complete this transition. And then you can always, and I highly recommend checking out whichever state you're interested in being part of. They all have a website. Florida Army National Guard has a great website, contact information, addresses, emails, things like that to help you tap into what resources you need to make it a seamless transition. And one thing I wanted to point out, this is a good place for it, is you can potentially fulfill your military obligation through this transition. So if you still have some time left in your contract, it can actually be fulfilled and satisfied by the transition if that's what you're choosing to do.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, so a lot of options and opportunity out there. So, folks, we'll link Terri's information and some other things that we talk about in this episode. So if you're interested in taking that leap and still wanting to wear the uniform, perhaps just in a different pace of life, we'll get you in touch with Terri and ask those questions and definitely hit those resources that she mentioned. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting, and you did kind of hit on this a little bit already, but there are obviously differences between being active and Guard and Reserve. But I think the benefits available are can be different too. So one of the things that I thought was interesting is that you can actually hold a disability rating from the VA if you're in the Guard and Reserve, which I didn't know previously. And so can you talk a little bit more about those benefits and like what a person transitioning might consider, like for their family, for them, and those different benefits for that transition?
Yeah, and I'll start with the VA one, just because it's the one I think that people are so surprised at, with a little caveat that people understand that you are not able to actually pull on that VA disability money while you're receiving drill and reserve pay. You can do that if you are muting a month. But for the most part, you either waive the military pay or you waive the VA disability. But the idea of getting that up and running is kind of a neat benefit of the Guard. It is not something you see much in active duty because I think for the most part, I think it would be seen as rendering you non-deployable, which is like a big no-no in the active component. But one of the things we also see through the active component is people don't keep great records as they go through. And so by the time retirement comes, they might be missing an ailment or don't have documentation to support an ailment. And that's something you can kind of do as you go along in the Guard. And we see that a lot more regularly, just getting that paperwork started. But one of the other benefits isn't just that monetary benefit. Guard people or reserve people who are having a disability rating can actually begin to get services at the VA during their
Yeah.
time in service. And so that's one sort of like important caveat. You need new glasses, you can go to the VA if you got that rating. You need to address your particular service-connected disability, the VA is there at your disposal, and you don't necessarily have to wait until retirement to do that. But I think some of those other benefits that the Guard and Reserve have are, I know you said there's some different ones, but really some of the things that I think make it special are the same. It's just your access to them and the eligibility to them that slightly change. But all the things you love about benefits in active duty, healthcare, commissary privileges, paycheck, retirement, education, career skills and career skill building, the adventure, the travel, the camaraderie, those are also available to you in the Guard. The way they come, like you said, might be at a slower pace, might be tapping into different resources, but you're not really giving that up by transitioning to Guard or Reserve. So it's an excellent way to continue service, to continue to build that retirement points, and to continue to serve your country and be in that environment while still having access. I mean, I was thinking about this earlier. We've gotten 3 degrees in this household from the military. And I mean, that's pretty good, right?
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah, none by me, but by other people in my family, right? By the time I was done with school, I was done with school. But my husband got his undergraduate and graduate degree paid for through the military. And my daughter's degree was paid for with the 9/11 benefits. So you really can tap into all the good stuff and just have, like you said, a slightly lower op tempo in the way you go about doing your military career.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, many things to think about, especially as you do life planning, the financial planning, the where to live, what do you want to do for the job, the career specialty, the MOS, whatever moniker you want to put on it. But there's one particular piece that you did mention in there. You talked about receipt of retirement benefits. So I'm going to quickly ask my question, but I know Andia has a story that she wants you to pull the thread on that's very closely related to it. So my question really is, regarding the retirement benefit, what are the major differences and, comparisons between an active versus a Guard or Reserve retirement? Because I know there's a lot of different statuses out there when you talk traditional versus, active or AGR, whatever. But if you want to ask your question and then let you kind of just roll with the whole thing, I think that'll be
Okay.
great.
Yeah, I think you know what I'm going to ask, which is that story of your neighbor that
Yes.
her husband had received his 20-year letter. And so so if you could tell that story and answer Ian's question, I
I
think
think
that'd
that's a
be
good
awesome.
kind of
Yeah.
mesh. Yeah.
So I happened to be on a walk with my neighbor, another military spouse like me. And as we're walking, she's telling me that she was super excited that her husband got his 20-year letter. And he is what we'll call a traditional M-Day guy. So that's an Army term. Different branches have different things. Like, Air Force, for example, calls it DSG, drill status guard. And like you said, lots of statuses. But in this case, we're going to, identify a traditional guardsman. So he was 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks out of the year. He had a regular civilian job here in the public sector in St. Augustine, where I live. But we're walking and she's super happy. And I'm like, oh, congratulations. Like, that's a really big milestone. And as we know, very few people actually do get to the 20, right? So the stats on that are pretty good. And she's like, we're just excited to have him home for that 1 weekend a month and to be getting this check now. And it just really gave me pause. And I had to stop and think about how I was going to explain to her that it wasn't quite what she thought. And I was also just really, really surprised that she didn't know what she needed to know in this case. And so for those listeners who have no idea, I'll tell you, her husband is in his early 50s. And while he did serve faithfully for 20 good years, and I'll get to the good years in a minute,
Mhm.
one of the major differences with Guard retirement is that you need to be 60 to start receiving it. So as opposed to active duty, who can fulfill their 20 or more, retire and start getting their benefits and pay right away, a Guard a Guard or reserve person has to wait until age 60. There is some caveat to that. There's a law passed that would allow you to back out deployment days for so many days in a certain areas. You could, reduce your time frame for retirement. But in this case, he had never deployed, and so he was looking at not being able to touch those benefits until age 60. And in addition to that, I knew from previous conversations with her that they were getting and utilizing TRICARE for healthcare for them and their 6 children. And the minute he retires from Guard service, that TRICARE benefit was going to change. He would still be eligible for it, but it would move to a different status and it would be considerably more expensive, like more than 10 times more expensive.
Wow.
So I did feel like I had to break the news to her, and it just felt like her heart
Gently.
dropped. Yeah, it wasn't really gently. I'm like, I sort of felt a panic for her, because they were going to make some major life decisions and not really understand what they were doing. Um, and, it's just, it was heartbreaking to have to explain that to her. But it really taught me a couple things. And one of the things that I learned from that was what we think people know, they don't. And so
Mm.
the education, like you were saying earlier, is so much geared toward active duty. And I think the thought is that, you've been in for 20 years, you knew or should have known. But that is just not the case with the Guard. Their time in drill weekends is very limited. And quite honestly, financial readiness is, while it's there, it's not a number one priority. Mission readiness is a priority.
Mhm.
And they have a lot to accomplish in a short amount of time. In addition to that, we don't live typically on installations where you have a financial person at your disposal. Some of these people come from a different state or from hours away or from a disconnected community. So you don't have the benefit of, neighbors all around you who are in the Guard, or just that, and there are some military rich communities. I consider ours one of them, but that's not true of everywhere. It's not even been true of my whole life in the Guard. So
Mhm.
the idea of knew or should have known kind of went out the window, but also it was just super, super heartbreaking. And so to talk about that, like her first point of like really picking up that check, you know, the retirement in the National Guard and Reserve is based on points, and every drill day is considered 1 point. In order
Mhm.
to get that 20-year letter, you need 20 good years. I quote it. Good years for military terms is getting a minimum of 50 points in a year. So if every drill date is 1 point, your AT, which is annual training, is 2 weeks. You get those points, and then for certain like full completion of that, they'll give you like 15 points. So basically, you need this minimum of 50 points in order to have a good year. And the formula, not to like nerd out with everybody with algebra and math, but is basically those number of points that you have through accumulation of your time in service divided by 360 times 2.5%. And that's going to give you the multiplier. And at that point, that's when your years of service come in. So you take that multiplier number times your years of service, and that is what you get for your retirement pay. And service members are able to get a breakdown and a list of their total points. Once a year they can request it, and or it could be technically given to them. I'm gonna say ask for it, really, if somebody's looking for advice on it, just in case.
Yeah.
But it is a different way to think about retirement and the time frame in which you receive it. And then obviously in the case of that story, just understanding that you are going to have extreme healthcare costs. And she wasn't even in the TRICARE young adult phase, which, as you know, is very expensive. But there is this interim status between the time that you retire and the time that you're eligible for TRICARE for life, which doesn't happen until you're 65. That is streamlined between active duty and Guard. Both,
Mhm.
if you're eligible for it, you get it at 65 and when you start taking Medicare. So those are the criteria to get into that. And in this case, she had quite a while before that time came. And so she was going to have to make other plans for that. And in the end, he decided to stay in.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting. We just happened to be at a conference together recently, and you and Lila Quintiliani, who works for MOA, who we had on a previous episode, one of our first
Yeah.
episodes that we dropped, but she talked a lot about TRICARE. You guys did a great session focused on Guard and Reserve and TRICARE, and I learned so much. And I think when it comes down to it, you've got to know where to go, look, read, understand, find the experts, read it in black and white yourself. So we will be sharing a lot of this stuff in the show notes, because I do think it is kind of difficult to understand all the different aspects, because sometimes you're only hearing like maybe what's useful to you right at that moment in your career
Yeah.
or in your life plan. But then, later you're going to need to kind of plan for that future and what that looks like. Because if you're 52 years old and you're getting out and you have 8 years and your TRICARE expenses are 10 times, like that's 8 years of 10 times. That's a lot of money. I'm not doing that math right now, but that's a lot.
And
So
we, I
I
mean,
think,
we haven't even
yeah.
got into some of those other things. I mean, the reserve component survivor benefits,
Mhm.
things like concurrent receipt, those are also, just so, your viewers know, like those are survivor benefits is still available with Guard and Reserve. It is a slight tweak and there's a few differences, but it is available. The biggest
Also,
difference
read
with
that letter, right? Read that 20-year letter, because it talks about that in that letter, right?
it does. Yeah. And there's been a lot of confusion about that, and even just understanding, because typically when you guys get out in active duty, you're making that election and you're moving on. Like if you're in a reserve component and you default to option C, you're in this gray area where you're not yet receiving retirement, but you're still serving, but you've chosen option C and or default to option C, and premiums are starting to incur at that time. So I
Mhm.
feel like this would totally confuse everybody listening, so I don't want to get too much into it, but it is definitely something to consider and understand. And if you don't know what it is and you think you're nearing 20 or want to hit 20, drop me an email and I'll help you out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you hit on the key piece of information is get informed.
Mm-hmm.
For those that are looking at the Garden Reserve, those that are in the Garden Reserve, those that are contemplating the Garden Reserve, know all you need to know, and don't think that that's the end, because there's probably more. Hit
Yeah.
Terry up, please. Just find resources. I think that's the big thing, because that really gets after the genesis of why we started this whole endeavor to begin with, is there's just so much to know. You can't know it all. So
Right.
we want to highlight these important things for people. And I think that we've talked, previously, where I think you mentioned like 25% of those folks leaving after like an initial enlistment or two, out of active duty, end up joining the Guard and Reserve. That's a huge number,
That is.
especially when there's something, like 300,000 people transitioning out of active service every year. Quick public math on that, 75,000 people roughly going into the Guard and Reserve. Now I can actually do a little bit of public math,
Good job.
There you
but
go. There you
that is
go.
a ton of people, and that's a ton of benefit that people, I think might misunderstand or feel that is misrepresented. So get out there and learn, learn,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
learn, learn. Connect with the experts. Connect with Terry. Connect with others. That's my message there.
Thank you. And that statistic actually came from Military One Source, where they reported one in four expressed intention to transition from active service into Guard or Reserve. And, you know, I know I'm plugging here for the Guard and Reserve, but it is really such an excellent way to stay in this world and stay in this realm. Like, I really look forward to my husband retiring and doing some space A travel, which is not something I'm eligible for while he's serving, but once he retires, I will be. So that's kind
Nice.
of cool too, like even stuff like that. So we've never done
Yeah.
that, or I've never done that. Um, but I know I'm like reaching for the stars with that, but even still, I mean, this is an opportunity to get greater education, still have that camaraderie, serve your country, tap into everything. So that's another thing I tell everybody, that, and anybody who will listen to me, in the Guard or Reserve, like there's so much out there, use it.
Mm-hmm.
When I first met my husband, he was doing correspondence courses all the time. I didn't even know what that was. Um, but any school he could get, anything he was doing because he liked being GI Joe and he just wanted to go out there. Mountain Warfare School, like Vermont. I'm like, okay, go be in the woods. Like, all right. But if you like that stuff, this is a great way to do it. And it's a great way to learn and hone your skills and get better at it. And whatever your jam is, you want to learn cyber, go into cyber. You want to do security forces, do security. You know what I mean? There's just so many opportunities. And the benefits are incredible. And I think it's really understated to a civilian what great benefits there are with being in the military. So it comes with risks, but so does everything else.
That's right. And I think it does go without saying too that goes with saying, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but what I mean is we do tend to see a lot of the information coming out that is focused on the active duty side.
Yes.
And we live in the active duty space. I was even having a conversation with my daughter the other day and talking to her about what being in the Guard and Reserve actually meant. And she was like, oh, wow, I had no idea, because she's lived in this active duty space. But more than 38% of our total force is made up of Guard and Reserve. And so we forget that there are differences there. We need to make sure that we're educating more. And so that's why we had you on the show today.
Well, and it's a great
you.
plug to, yes, thank you. But it's also a great plug to, really push that there is something else out there, when 38+% of the force is that Guard and Reserve.
Yeah.
It's a great way to be able to give back to this country, but pursue things in a part-time manner, in a full-time manner, in a specialized manner, put down roots. So there's a lot of great benefit out there, So yeah, huge plug to the Guard and Reserve and our brothers and sisters out there that choose that path. Excellent path. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to wrap up this portion, but I do want to give you just a moment. If there's anything else that we missed, I feel like we kind of covered everything, but we didn't cover everything, let's be honest, but what we plan to. But if there's anything else you want to add, like, the floor is yours.
No, I think we'll leave it at that because I think we can get into some really confusing stuff. But I think if there's somebody out there who's considering it and wondering, take the time to look into it. I'm on a lot of forums on social media and I see people deliberating this. I see spouses and girlfriends on there asking questions like, do I have to give up my career? What's life going to be like? Do we move around in the Guard? Like, those are really great questions. And there's not a one size fits all answer. And like you said earlier, there's tons of different statuses and tons of different categories and placements. And I think the positive out of that is there's opportunity for you to fit somewhere.
Yeah.
I
love
that
that
means
statement.
to me.
Yeah.
I love
great
that
message.
statement. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
that should be their tagline.
Yeah, for sure.
We're just helping them out with marketing.
I know. I officially work for recruiting and retention. No, I don't.
Yeah, you really should.
No. And really, could have a jaded, you could have a jaded look at it after 31 years, and it should tell you something that after 31 years, I don't.
Yeah. That's
Huge.
pretty,
Mm-hmm.
It's impressive. Yeah. Absolutely.
Bravo.
Yeah. Bravo. Well done, Bailey family. So okay. So we're gonna play. We're gonna get into the fun here a little bit.
Okay.
So the first thing I'm gonna ask you is our metaphorical rucksack. So bringing something, and I know you've got transition 8 years out, but when you're thinking about military service and bringing things into your civilian life, or maybe things you'd like to leave behind, so what's in your rucksack, and what are you going to chuck out of your rucksack?
Okay, so I don't have a metaphorical answer. I have an actual physical answer. I have some metaphorical stuff popping around back there, but I really thought long and hard about this, and I wanted it to be funny and different. And maybe this is just TMI for some people, but I'm going to say it anyway because that's who I am. I really want I want my husband's silkies to come because he still looks really good in them. So they got to go in the rucksack when he retires. All the silkies are coming. But in seriousness, I think that all of the adventures, all the people along this path, it's a path that I never thought I'd be in. When we were just dating, he thought about going active duty, and it just was, I'm like, we had no kids, we're just dating, and I'm like, you can go, but I'm not going with you. And that was my thought at the time. And he decided to stay in the Guard, and he was enlisted at that time, and throughout his time transitioned into being an officer. But I could never have imagined this life. I couldn't have made it up if I tried. And so taking all those memories, all those people, all those learning experiences with me, and all the goof ups, I think would for sure have to go in the rucksack with the Silkies. So
Oh, excellent.
yeah,
Love it. Strong answer.
Yeah.
he
All right.
might
So
kill me for that.
what are you checking out? What are you leaving behind?
Yeah, I definitely the bugs. I mean, my husband's in the Army and he plays in the woods a lot. And every time he comes home, there's like a new critter that comes out of that bag. And I am really looking forward to that not happening anymore. And especially when he's in the field in Florida, because we have some really scary stuff roaming around here. Um, but I also think that I will enjoy the time. So giving up the late night calls and the emergencies in the middle of the night. And should we stay in Florida, the one thing that I'll really look forward to leaving behind is the fact that he constantly has to be called to duty when a hurricane comes.
Mhm.
So I deal with hurricanes solo and have ever since we've been here. And that is a lot of stress, prep, and cleanup. So I'll look forward to leaving his activations behind during hurricane season. So
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah,
That's
excellent
a
answers.
very good answer.
And I can't say I disagree with you on the bugs. Yeah, I'm not a fan either. So
oh
all good.
man, it's so bad. It's so bad. So bad. I hate bugs.
Okay, so over to me. Now we're going to give you the opportunity to help us with two truths and a lie, military style. So you're going to get the opportunity to guess the answer from our previous guest. So our previous guest is Todd McCaffrey. He's a retired Army two-star, spent more than 30 years in uniform, and currently works as the secretary for South Carolina's state VA office. So, to that end, let me give you his three facts, and you can pick which one is the lie. Okay, so number one, Todd McCaffrey said at one point he wore a Navy uniform because he was a midshipman his first year in ROTC in college. Number two, he said his family moved 19 times in his 34 years of active service. And number three, he said he had assignments to Korea, the US, and Germany, where he lived in those three places. What is the lie?
Let me first say, how do you have me following a two-star?
That's
Okay.
how important we think you are, Terry.
Yes, 100%.
I don't
Absolutely.
know about that. I am going to go with the putting on the Navy uniform. I
That's
Yeah.
feel like
actually true.
Mm, okay.
Yeah, it was.
All
And
right.
actually, my guess was I thought he moved more than 19 times, which now in retrospect, I feel like was kind of mean but that was actually true also.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't enough.
So
But
yeah, the lie was they never actually lived or were assigned to Korea. They lived in all the other places. He was TDY there, but they never actually lived there. So yeah,
so yeah,
there we go.
nice. Well, good
Mm,
guess.
Yeah,
Good guess.
very good guess. All
I
right, so
figure people
Terry,
are territorial with their branch, but okay,
that's right.
okay.
That's
I
right. Yeah, for
concede.
sure.
I concede.
Yeah. Okay. So over to you. You get to give
Okay.
us your three facts, your bits of information, and we will reveal what the answer is, the lie, on the next episode of the next tour. So
Okay.
Terry, over to you.
All right. My first tidbit is we have lived in two military housing units.
Mhm.
I should preface this and say mine are Guard related. So when you think of the Guard, how plausible are some of these things with the Guard?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
My number two is we've been married 25 years and he's been away on duty for more than 20 of our anniversaries.
Hmm.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. And number three, despite being in the Guard, we've moved more times for his job than mine.
Wow. Those are all really good pieces of information. I think all of them are exceptionally plausible.
Plausible, yeah.
But again, like I said, we'll give our next guest the opportunity to guess that and see if we can get it right. as we think about it offline. So Terri, thank you so very much for playing the games with us. And moreover, thank you so very much for sharing your expertise with us today on, just a few of the really important things related to Garden Reserve. Again, as mentioned, we'll make sure that we link your LinkedIn and your contact info in our show notes, along with the websites and other things that you've helped provide us. So to that end, please, to our viewers and folks, follow us, like us, subscribe, comment, ask us questions, hit us up on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, our website, of course, thenexttourpodcast.com. Yeah, we got a lot of them out there. And listen to us if you like the audio stuff on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and Audible. So Terri, thank you so very much. We really appreciate having you on today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me.
We'll see you all next time on the next tour.
Yes. Have a great day.
The views, opinions, and advice expressed by our guest on the next tour are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast, Andia, or any affiliated organizations. While we strive to provide helpful and accurate information, this podcast is for informational purposes only. We encourage listeners to consult with professionals or conduct their own research before making any significant decisions related to military transition or post-service life. The content is intended as guidance and personal perspective, not as official advice.